Okay, folks, thank you all for joining us today. I didn't even know I was going to be here, but here I am. I'm Lisa Nicole, for those who don't know me, and I'm absolutely delighted that we have David O'Connor joining us today. Um, and David has worked with me and with Mantra via his own organization, working with some of our clients for many years. And when I was in Focus Ireland, working where I was the client, and he came in and did a lot of really good work with us there as well. So we go back over 10 years, and it's always a pleasure having you, David. You're
Thank
a
you.
fountain of knowledge in this space. And so, really looking forward to hearing what you have to cover with folks today. And without further ado, I will hand over to you.
Perfect, perfect, perfect. Okay, I'm just going to start sharing and get to that point of view. So we have a cover slide. Can everybody see that?
Yes, but you could go into presenter mode as well because we can
Yeah.
see. Yeah, thanks.
You want to go into presenter mode? Let me just move things
Or
along
full
here.
screen
View.
down the bottom here. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, because I'm just viewing the slideshow. I
Yeah.
can't see.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. That's okay.
What are you seeing
We're
that's
just
causing?
seeing the next slides along the bottom, but it's absolutely fine.
Okay, let me just try one more time, just to kind of because it's view. Hmm.
While you're doing that, I'll just say brand is so important to me. I know a lot of people within the nonprofit and impact sectors can be a little bit allergic to the use of that word, but for me, it's like all about impact, all about purpose. It's the perfect topic to have on today. And I think it's fundamentally so important, both as organizations and individuals, to be conscious about it. So delighted you're getting to cover this. Um,
Okay, so look, I've put the slide up. I can't see the
you,
notes and things like that, which is probably a bit of a difficulty for me. But
oh,
and I can't see you guys, which is a real.
oh,
But I'm going to jump in and just start anyway. Um, so yeah, building a personal brand that reflects the real you. A little context about me, guys, before we jump into it is that and why I got into purpose. I used to work in advertising. That was my background. I started in the creative side. And so I started in advertising in the UK. Well, I started here first and then went over to the UK and got myself an English accent and then came back. But working on the creative side, a lot of what we were doing was creating promises and ideas of promises that stick. And what really struck me during that time was the difference between the promise that we were making and very compelling promises and expensive promises, and the difference between those and actually the organization behind the promise. And it struck me kind of as being something really weird, that really troubled me. And time again, I was bringing this up and I was told, you know what, you're more of a brand guy. At which time I didn't really understand the concept of brand. But that started me on the brand journey to try and connect organizations to the promises that they make. I then set up brand agency in the UK and worked at that for quite a number of years before coming back to Ireland, where I sort of worked on some some very big projects and some very small projects. So the GA rebrand was a huge project coming back. Things like Electric Ireland, but also things like naming and branding Leap Card, and then into areas like charity, where I did a lot of work with the likes of Irish Heart, Bernardo's, Focus Ireland, Child Vision, ISPCA. The list goes on, and also, of course, numerous small and social enterprises working with Mantra. So what I want to do today is to bring a kind of practitioner point of view on purpose, and hopefully that's going to be helpful. Okay. And the thing about purpose is that it's not perfect. And it's not perfect because everybody's on a different journey in their evolution as an organization. Every organization is different. And it's not a one size fits all, but we tend to get a one size fits all definition and expectation for purpose. And I think that's problematic. And I want to talk about that today. And what I'd like to do is kind of hopefully demystify. I want to give you a definition of purpose that you'll probably not have heard before because it's mine. It's simple. I want to try and then show how to make that purpose meaningful and operational, and give you some tips as to how that has happened through a case study that I'm going to show you. So a quick pulse test, and this is where not having the chat function is probably going to trouble me a little bit, but I want to ask you a few questions, and then maybe you can sort of write down the answers, or just pop it
Yeah,
into the
I
chat.
can call out whatever people put in chat,
Perfect.
David. So no problem.
If anything interesting comes through, first is how important is purpose for you? And think about it from a 1 to 10 perspective. And if you're going to pop it in the chat, just say important and a number. Okay. So that's the first thing to think about, because for some people, they may not think it's that important. You may think you already have it, or you may think actually you don't need it. So, and you can also chat if you actually don't know, it's a good thing to say.
A lot of very high numbers coming out so far. So tens, eights,
Okay,
10. So, a lot of people agreeing it's very, very important.
great. Well, that means we're on the right track here. That's great. The second then is how clear is your organization's purpose?
Are we doing a scale again?
Yeah, scale again and say clear and a number so that we can differentiate between the different comments.
Yeah. Okay, so starting just to see a little bit of a variety here. So you've got some at the much lower, others at the 6, 7, 7.5, not clear enough. There's one or two higher, but really we're more in the mid range on
Okay.
this. And yeah, so we've a 1, a 4, 6, and 7, 7.5, but everybody kind of agreeing it's so important. So yeah.
So good. We've got it. We've kind of an intent, and then we've got a challenge, which is I think is good for this session.
Yeah.
And the next one, this is a really big one for me. If you go back to what I was saying about advertising, it's does your organization's purpose influence your culture? And that's a yes, no answer. And you can say influence yes, influence no, or influence don't know. That's perfectly fine.
So far, people are saying yes, it does influence,
Good.
but not necessarily unanimously across the board for everyone.
Okay. Okay, that's great. Well, look, that's something I'm
Yeah.
going to be talking about too, which is
Okay.
again, something is
Great.
close to my heart. Um, and then this is, I just want you to think about this. Could you describe your organization's purpose to a new employee in a way that is meaningful to them? So it's now not about just saying, well, I kind of know what we stand for, we know what our purpose is, but actually, can you actually sit somebody down when you're inducting them as a new employee and saying, this is what is our purpose and is it meaningful to them? And again, another yes, no, meaningful, yes, meaningful, no. Or meaningful question mark.
So meaningful, yes, is coming out uh, fairly solidly. Um, I and I guess the question is, if it wasn't you communicating that, would you still say that? So, can everybody do that?
Yeah,
You
fine.
know?
It's. I mean, the point is, it's a pulse test of where we are now.
Yeah.
You may
Yeah,
think
yeah.
different. You may think differently about this later on
So, so
when I actually identify what purpose really is and
yeah.
how it affects a culture. So it's just
Two
a
comments are coming up here, just David, just to
yeah.
give you a sense on the post. So Maeve says depends on the role they're doing, but overall, yes. Dara says meaningful, yes, but it might differ depending on who is doing the onboarding. So
Cool.
there is a lot of, nuance to that, but just
Yeah.
temperature check, generally, yes.
I'm also aware that there's a large difference between um, corporate organizations, industry, and charity. Um,
Yeah.
and I've worked across both, and purpose tend to operates differently. And a lot of times, what I find is charitable organizations assume that their cause is their purpose. So therefore, we're in the cause of homelessness. And in itself, it's motivating. We're in the cause of charity, and in itself is motivating. But actually, when you get out there as an organization and you start trying to communicate, and you're trying to have a share of mind within that space, you need to be able to differentiate what you do versus other people in your same space. You need to be able to actually have something which is crystal clear about you, and something that is very meaningful. And that's the kind of difference I think that happens is that that um, I think between how charities think and how industry thinks, and that's again something I'll talk about as we move through this.
Yeah,
And then the
great.
other is, can you name an organization with a clear sense of purpose? So if we can pop up any names, so I can get a sense of what you see as being a clear sense of purpose.
I might always answer the same one to this, so sorry about that. Everybody who knows me knows probably I'm going to say
Go on.
Patagonia. Sorry. Always. But anyway, let's see what everybody else puts up. So we have Trocra. We have, I said Patagonia. We have Snag Tights. I'm intrigued, Karen. We'll come back to that. Irish Cancer Research. Uh, yeah, it's Jim Coffee, Human Collective. So a bit of variety coming up here.
Okay, cool. All righty. Well, look, that's great, and thanks for all that input, guys. I should plow on.
And super
Well,
value. Sorry, keep going.
super. Okay, so when I, as a practitioner, when I'm out there, talking to organizations about purpose, what I tend to engage all the time with is uncertainty. People are not entirely sure, and there are a number of reasons for that. There's a lot of hype about purpose. You go into any business magazine, you just go, you go online. Purpose is a big thing, and people hype purpose because they want part of it. Um, you've got practitioners who've got jargon around it, who basically spend a lot of time trying to own their space within purpose so they can actually have their own bespoke way of doing things. You've also got people who are involved in purpose washing, who are basically trying to sort of masquerade purpose as being authentic. And what that tends to do, and what I see a lot of now, and there are a number of articles coming up on this, on things like purpose fatigue. People are tired of being told you should have purpose. Okay, and there's a sense of disconnection. So when I talk to companies, this is kind of what I'm getting. I'm getting this sense that they've had so much of the hype and the jargon and the washing that actually they're uncertain as to whether it's for them or whether they should just engage with it. Is it just it is just a marketing thing, or what is it? And that's kind of what I'm kind of engaging with daily. But everybody knows that purpose is important. As human beings, we know that without a sense of purpose, life is meaningless. And if a sense of purpose, you can make decisions really clearly. With a sense of purpose, you can actually sort of bring people and align people with you. With a sense of purpose, how you speak and how you think is more positively directed. So we know that. But many businesses and organizations just do not know where to start with purpose. And as a result, there are a number of challenges that I encounter. The first one is humanity versus business. Okay. We are thinking, emotional beings. Um, you know, so are our customers. Our customers are emotional beings. We live our life through story. We live our life through ideas. We build perceptions, you know. And so on both ends of the scale, you have yourselves as individuals, we are emotional, and our customers are emotional. And in between, we have risk averse and competitive worlds. Okay, where emotion has no place, yet where emotion really is very rife, but actually it has no place. These things must coexist if you're going to generate a clear sense of authentic purpose. The second challenge, I was involved in a podcast about 2 weeks ago, and the kind of the logo of the podcast is two people having a punching match, and the theme of the whole thing is marketing versus purpose. And I found that very, very interesting that they would actually have a podcast purely based upon that. But it is a situation within the industry where, if you have no sense of what purpose really is, or authentic purpose, or you're not trying to engage in the kind of the emotional side, and if that doesn't become part of strategy, it ends up being placed into marketing. And marketing has got short-term measurements and metrics. So long and short-term thinking must coexist if purpose is to have a place. And the other one, which I find, and this is a biggie for me, is the definition of purpose. And you can after today, you can go and have a look today and see what you find if you ask ChatGPT or whatever it is, what is purpose? This is what the kind of thing you'll get. Okay. Business purpose is the deeper why that connects profit to positive impact, aligning commercial success with societal human value. I understand and get that, but it's quite difficult to unpack because there are books written about why. There's you know there's a Simon Sinek has made an entire career based upon his whole why book and his why TED Talks. Um, so there's why to know to engage, the positive impact to engage, aligning commercial success with societal human value to engage. So there's a lot in this to unpack. And the challenge is also when practitioners like myself go out there and start teaching people about purpose. We talk about brands like Patagonia, Dove, and Nike, as examples. Organizations that bear no resemblance to the people we're talking to. And this is another challenge which I've engaged many, many times. So what I try to do is use these to get general principles, but try and use case studies of things that might resonate with people. And I'll try and do a bit of that today. So all of this, I think, is a barrier to building brand strategy. And the problem with if you're not building brand strategy is that then purpose becomes delegated down to marketing, and it becomes campaign led, and it's therefore ineffective. It's also a barrier to building authenticity, about connecting what you do externally to what you do internally.
And if I might jump in, it can also really be a barrier to fundraising. And I thought it was really interesting, David, that you're talking about the purpose versus marketing. In the same way, brand versus fundraising are often pitted against each other. And
Correct.
actually, it should be a strategic thing woven through the whole organization, end
Yeah.
to end, so that everything lifts. So it's really interesting to me. Keep going.
Yeah, it is. No, yeah, and this is kind of onto this slide where kind of my question is does any of this resonate? And I kind of a show of hands, or anybody kind of got anything to say, would be interesting at this point of time. Does anybody have a sense of the challenges that I have just described?
Feel free to jump on or unmute if you want to contribute verbally, or else use the chat functionality if you want to
Yeah.
make any comments about this.
Because I could be talking about something that you think, yeah, that doesn't resonate, but it's just to get a sense that does any of this resonate, and either show of hands or check something into the chat, or if you have anything particular to say. And the second question to ask you, is there any other factors that make purpose a challenge for you? Okay, so something to think about. If you want to articulate it now, it's fine. We'll have a space at the end to discuss if need be.
Yeah, John just saying, yeah, it does resonate. It's relevant there, and I'm sure certainly as we go through some of the other examples you have, it'll bring it to life a bit more as well for folks.
All
Yeah.
right. Well, I'll just plow on, and then we can have a chat at the end. But this is just a point. So I'm going to come back to the whole thing about purpose. As a point is important because, as I said, we kind of all know it is. And that first question, where I got a lot of tens and eights, shows that everybody here also thinks it's important. And when I look and see organizations are sort of surveys, of CEOs and big brands, you get some high numbers too. 98% think having a strong purpose is critical to success. 79 think purpose is central to their organization strategy and success. And also, the last one is the whole idea of having responsibility to lead with purpose and address societal challenges. For me, there are two things in there. There's purpose and societal challenge, because I think there's a difference between core purpose and societal challenges. But it's a good point made that actually, if you think about the age demographic of employees now, you know, they are a demographic that actually for them societal challenges are very, very important. So actually engaging your your people with your culture with societal challenges are important. But I do see it as being to some degree different from actually core purpose. I'll talk more about that in a sec. So in the list of whys, of competitive positioning, I'm going to talk about that too in a minute, but also loyalty, advocacy, brand reputation, employee engagement and morale. I would add to that retainment, and retention is really, really important in recruiting and retention. Increased innovation. And this is something else, that I find with organizations that have a clear sense of purpose, innovation becomes much more potent, long-term growth and social impact. So I want to just jump in and give you my simple definition of authentic purpose. And what I want to do is show you the definition and then show you a case study of that definition in action. And hopefully then it'll all make sense at the end. Okay. But I'm making this very simple. It's something that matters to both you and to your customers. It's a bond between you organizationally and your customers in a mutual value exchange. So I'm going back again to my origins of kind of trying to connect culture of organizations and how organizations think and what they value with actually what is valuable to customers. When I distill it down, it's what I refer to as shared meaning. And here's a simple graph, but um, when I take organizations and I map them onto something like this, a lot of organizations I find the culture is separate from the meaning that is being communicated to the customer. The promise is different. Okay, and the case study I'm going to show will actually show how that really works. But I think it's important to have your culture and your customer connected through shared meaning. The other thing is that everybody seems to think that purpose has to be some sort of huge, big parade, something lofty, noble, remarkable. It doesn't. It just has to be something that is meaningful and authentic. Okay. A lot of clients I work with tend to try and create these kind of big superlatives and big statements. Actually, it's actually about finding what's really, really important. This is an organization, Need More Space. I worked with some years ago, and they were an offshoot of another business I'd worked with, a family business. And they had this organization called Need More Space. It's a storage organization. So storage is, shutters and boxes and locks and high-vis jackets and forklift trucks and that kind of thing. And I know if you probably watch TV, you might have seen Storage Hunters. You got an idea what goes on inside these places. What they found is that they were fighting for competitive space against lots of different people saying all the same thing, but they knew intuitively that they were culturally different. And what they wanted to do is to create a brand that actually had a more authentic sense. We never talked about purpose. It wasn't in disclosure here. Purpose became how we described it at the end. But they just wanted something that was more authentic to who they were, and they knew that the brand they had was not. Okay. So the kind of process we went through was first interviewing. Okay, sitting down with key people. So when I say key people, I'm not talking about the MD, although he was interviewed, but I'm talking about, the people at the hard end, the person at reception, the person on the forklift truck, the person who's actually showing people around, that kind of stuff, and talking to them about the business. And then obviously there was a series of sessions where we got together to bring in some of the stuff that came in from those interviews and talk about it and see what does that really mean for us, and how would we actually create a set of values out of that, and how do we actually sort of articulate who we really are out of that. And there was a very common sense coming through, and I think it's probably because they were a family business where they had a strong sense of empathy towards people walking through the door. They had a strong sense that, that there were people and not just a job. They weren't just a number. And always they wanted to get to know the people. Why are you storing stuff here? What is it you're storing? How can we help you? And they always knew actually that the storage, process was somewhat stressful. And what then was said to me was actually, you know what? This is an emotional business. Now, for me, I'm looking at storage. I was quite surprised by this. But they talked about the whole fact that actually, anybody who comes through the door, there are things like moving house, downsizing, storing granny's stuff who's passed away, all these different things. Everybody comes through with a story and they wanted to understand that story, but they knew that all of these stories were emotional. Okay. And they were founded on some simple things. So we built through the whole thing, through the sessions we're having, a kind of sense of story for them. Okay. So at the core of the brand is the value we place on relationships with people and their relationship with belongings. This fully, embraced how they were thinking. They went on to talk about the fact that, what is being stored may not have any market value, but is valuable to the people who want to store it. Okay, and they understood that. And it's interesting because they were talking to me about some of the things people were storing. You're thinking, my goodness, they're paying money to store that, but it has value to them. But also the whole idea, a lot of what people store are things that define them. Okay. And they find that very good as well and very interesting. And they often, when people are storing stuff, want to understand what it is and why and talk about it. But also displacement of belongings can bring a life event into sharp reality. So the brand idea that they kind of came up with, well, it was, through that whole thing is actually, we're not storing, we're helping people move on. We're helping people transition from one stage to the next. And from that came just a general sense of making room for life. And when that came forward, it was like a light bulb for everybody. It's the realization that this is what we're doing. We're not necessarily into storage. Storage is the functionality of what we do. Room for growing family, room to grow your business, room to breathe after a life event. And from that actually then came a rebrand. They named it Nesta, had make room for life as a brand tagline. What I will say is that make room for life is rarely shown externally. It's all internal. It's about culture, and that culture drives the business. So for them, the shared meaning was about making room for life. And that inspired the culture of the organization to be more productive, to be more engaging, to be unified to a point that actually, it changed the business. It's all very well having, a tagline. And I say this is an intrinsic internal tagline. But what I want to talk about is now how you make that purpose actionable or how they did. Okay. So as part of the process, in a big room, we kind of discussed, well, what are the key happenings, what we call touch points, from the point of view when a customer decides they want to store something to when they leave? What are all the touch points all the way through? And what's happening? Because if we have all this sense of wanting them to understand that we cherish their belongings, that we have a sense of duty of their care, and that we want to help them sort of move on. How do we actually think during that process? And they mapped out what customers are doing, what they're doing, how that makes customers feel, what they should be doing to change that feeling. And from that, from a 10-point point plan or 12-point, whatever it is, they created an action plan to operationalize the business. And that action plan was put into place. And 5 years later, I sat down with the managing director, Brian Heffron, and asked him, how is it going for you? And what he was saying is, we've doubled our turnover, but nothing has changed physically. What's happened is we've become much more efficient. We sell better to people. People stay with us. They buy more from us. And we've all had much better performance. So that's the kind of whole thinking about shared meaning, making room for life. And I said they didn't actually turn that into an external line. It's something they had internally, but it changed the organization. And it was meaningful both to the customer and to them. And for me, that is authentic purpose. Like I said, the whole uncertain territory piece. This is something which it's not just us and me that's struggling with this. Harvard struggled with it, and Harvard have a habit of making everything academic and to me kind of impenetrable. But one thing they did do when they looked at purpose to try and break it down to make it more meaningful. And what they've done is talked about three purpose zones. You can see how this may necessarily resonate with what I've just been talking about. They broke it into three: competence, okay, which is it's you know think about from competence point of view, safety and reliability. I think a brand might come into your mind, but in things like cars, safety, reliability, sort of force sprung duct technique. It's about competence in areas that are very, very important that are meaningful to the customer and meaningful internally, have to be made meaningful in order to deliver on the promise. Okay, so it's really based upon the function. So it is nothing huge, but it's something very, very important and meaningful. The next is culture. Okay, and talk about internal alignment and collaboration with key partners. I'd put kind of Nesta into this kind of space, but also I think it is, it's not just that, it is also builds strong client advocacy as well when you have a culture-based purpose. And then, of course, you've got the social cause, one of which we all tend to look towards as being purpose, but the social good to which we aspire. Companies that push for societal change are more visible, and we talked about Patagonia earlier on. So this kind of purpose zones, I think, is a very interesting kind of way of looking at it. So there's a whole article written on this, guy. So if you want to go and read it, just Google Harvard three purpose zones, and you'll
Yeah, it is excellent. Actually, I was going to just say it's definitely worth the read, and it. I mean, we've often talked, David, about the positioning. I know you're going to come on to
yeah,
briefly because we're getting tight on time, but
yeah,
we've often talked about how the function zone on its own is not where a brand, certainly a charity type brand, wants to compete solely, because we want to be in that kind of emotional connection piece, which is why we talk about the cause an awful lot more. But when we're talking about unifying the whole organization, that kind of culture of everybody getting behind the brand idea and the understanding
yeah.
of the simple narrative, it is, I think this article covers that really well, that you do need to have them all joined up. So I think it's really good. I'm just conscious of time, so
Okay,
we
so I'm
hopefully
gonna
get to
I plow
go a
on
little
really.
bit more. Yeah.
I'm gonna plow on really quickly. I just want to talk about positioning because one of the things I said earlier on competitive positioning, and again I'm trying to tie purpose to things that are really important. And positioning has been described as a singular idea that you own inside the mind of a prospect. Think again, safety, reliability, but also how you perceive versus the competition. And I use this spectrum as being an analysis of positioning. I use this in a lot of projects. And briefly saying, it goes across early stage businesses, okay, are very much in there saying what we have, what we do. And their purpose tends to sit around there. But when you get into the competitive space, you have to talk more about how we do it, whether it's adding technology, whether it's having different options, whether it's 24-hour, whatever it is, to try and sort of build a competition. And I find, if I'm being honest, it's around early stage competitiveness where a lot of charities and social enterprises sit. When you get into kind of the more intangible emotional side, high value differentiation, who we are and why we do it, that is where you get cut through, but also for organizations you get higher margin, you higher differentiation. Um, and thinking about that from a point of view of Nesta, who were very much in what we do, it moved them right across into the why we do it space, into the purpose space, which is why they were able to double their turnover in a 5-year period, because they moved themselves away from that functional space. So quickly rounding out, this is what I sort of describe authentic purpose is. It is, shared purpose. And the question then for you going forward is what is your shared purpose and your shared meaning? Okay,
Thanks, David.
I'm just jumping to questions, and I'm gonna jump stop the share so
Yeah.
I can now see everybody.
That's great. Thank you so much. So loads of food for thought. I am conscious we don't have a huge amount of time, but we do have some time for some questions. Just before we do that, just to say, I love the Nesta example because it it really shows a lot of corporates do really struggle with purpose. Actually, they think it's for us over in the charity world, and it shows how it really came from inside the organization right through the organization. In Focus Ireland, when we did that first piece of work with you,
Yeah.
this positioning spectrum was a game changer for me. It really helped us move from we are a national organisation with 79 services all across Ireland. It moved us from that to thinking, well, so what? What is it all about? What are we really trying to do? Into that whole thinking about, well, we're here because homelessness is wrong and we have to change that, etc. So it was really game changer. So just to say, I know the example is Nestra, but I'd love to hear from folks, and customer might mean your donors, your funders, and it might mean also your the people you're there to serve, work for, work with, co-create with. So just to say, obviously, language-wise, interpretation-wise, very open, but love to hear what people think. How is this resonating? And from your own perspective on the how do we move from middle of the range clarity to much clearer? What are the takeouts or what's resonating the most for you in what David has covered today? And we won't force anyone, but I am looking at you, Elizabeth. Just saying, nobody messing. That was just me joking. But thoughts, I know, Dara, you put up a comment around, obviously you're here with the HR hat on. I know you put up a comment about this really being something to really drive kind of culture and that inside out. And that is a huge part of this, is something you can say that makes sense internally, externally to everyone and has meaning for everyone is the sweet spot. So I think that is key. Anybody want to jump in?
Yeah, to me, it's all about everybody being on the same page, just and the energy of the organization going into the reason why we're here.
Yeah.
And I think if we had purpose, if our purpose was at the forefront, then and we constantly remind ourselves of that, then that would be a much easier task.
Yeah, I completely. I think I love that phrase, the energy going towards the reason, because
Yeah.
again with Nesta, one of the things that Brian, the MD, said to me, he said that they hold weekly meetings with their team, and they were trying to kind of rationalize some for part of the business that was actually a little bit ineffective for them, and they were making it more efficient. But it meant necessarily that there's something slightly tricky for the customer, and one of the people just put their hand up and said, "Well, that's not very Nesta." And, you know, he just, it made him think. And he said to me, he said, there are times I lose track of why. And every now and then somebody holds me to account. And that's, it's really important. And again, I think that, I have a favorite phrase, which is, without a purpose that is bigger than yourself, you only serve yourself. And, not I'm not being critical of the charitable space, but everybody walks in with a sense of purpose. But it's not necessarily, they're not the same purpose. And this is something I think has been a huge challenge for charities, because the purpose that sits at the front line of those who are dealing with the people that you're helping, and the purpose that sits with fundraising, and the purpose that sits with advocacy, and the purpose that sits with management are all different. And that was, a challenge, Lisa Nicole, that we had when we
Absolutely, and getting the shared purpose to be bigger than our own individual
once you had a sense of shared
item.
purpose, then it was a connector between all of them, and it allowed things that could not happen.
Yeah.
So that's just another
Yeah.
point to make in relation to charitable space.
Thank you. So Karen, I see you've taken off your mute. I'll come to you and then to Elizabeth.
Just because we've just done culture work with Mantra, actually. And so because we work with vulnerable people, there's a culture of overwork. and there's a culture of it never ending. And actually, and you know, I'm not saying martyrdom, but there's a little bit of this will never end. We will never be able to do enough, and so we must keep going. And I don't know how that fits in terms of what you're saying, actually, because what we have needed to do is draw back, because if you behave like your service users, you're doing something wrong, and it's something that we need to keep watching out for. So for me, your model doesn't, I don't know if I'm not getting it or it's just different for our organization, but our culture needs to become softer and more about self-care and, you know, all of those things that actually is what you want the parents and families who we support to be doing. So I suppose just to share that, because I'm not quite clear, which is why I didn't jump in straight away. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. And I'll pick that up with you as well separately, Karen. I guess for me, and sorry, Elizabeth, I know you were going to come in as well. For me, it's like actually a lot of this is about doing the thinking and then making sure you actually have a real clear sense of, you know, the underpinning kind of shared belief or purpose that brings the whole organization together. It's still always about why you exist and for whom you exist, but the culture piece should stem from that in terms of how your values align and so on. So I'll pick it up with you separately, but I don't think they're at odds.
No, it's a bigger conversation to have, I think, because we're not actually talking at odds with each other. I think it's just perspective.
Yeah, yeah. Elizabeth.
Yeah, I was just going to say when you were just talking there, that add in 10,000, 11,000 members on top of all the different words that you were saying there. I work in an organization that is members led, and in essence, they own the organization. They come very much probably for the same reason, but then it becomes kind of aligned to their own areas, their own services that they provide within those areas. And I do find that sometimes the culture, the purpose overarching is there, but actually the meaning of that is distributed and actually displayed differently for different people. And we've worked with Mantra on a strategy that has now, you know, grown arms and legs, and actually it's showing us even more I suppose, different people's purposes that is sitting in the umbrella of purpose of the organization, but actually very much goes down to their wants, their needs, their areas, their communities. And so to try and pitch everybody into the same line, that we all want this one kind of look and feel and purpose and shared meaning, it doesn't actually, it can be very difficult to kind of get over the line. And certainly for me as the fundraiser, I just have to stay in what that looks like for a national overarching charity, as opposed to what the little town down in somewhere wants. And it can be very difficult, and people see you as being, I suppose, pushing back on what they want, their purpose, their meaning. But actually I'm not. I'm just sticking with the overarching, because that's where the best, you know, place for me to stay, since I've really kind of started in the task force of the new strategy and really getting to speak to people. It's so varied. It's just so varied. And try and get everybody back into the one train of thought has been
that
really,
golden
really
thread,
difficult.
I think, is what you're looking for. I mean, everybody will always have their own perspective on how this, you know, distills down for their area, but it is about trying to still, you have to stay at that level, because that's ultimately what they all fed into and what is the overall shared purpose. But they're going to have a different articulation of the day-to-day from themselves. But yeah, I think the nuance comes down to the, you know, how money is spent, and, you know, not just for your organization, for all, you know, priorities are different, but the overall shared purpose should still be something they're all on the same page for. I'm very conscious of time, so I just want to say thank you to David for giving us a very thought-provoking and kind of good food for thought. We will follow up, as always, with some with the recording and maybe a couple of notes or thoughts around kind of what do we do with this? What do we do with this no matter where you're at? specific kind of nudges or thoughts around kind of how we maybe move from one part to the next and so on. So bear with me and we'll formulate some thoughts on that. But thank you all for joining, and for anybody who watches back later, any particular questions, of course, you can come back to us at Mantra separately as well. But always a pleasure. Thank you, David, and thanks. Lovely to see everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Nikki.
Thanks,
Yeah.
folks.
Thank you, Dave.